From coast to coast and border to border, this is Beyond the Beltway. I'm Bruce DuMont, live every Sunday night from Chicago. Nice to have you with us. We've been chatting around the table for a whole hour now. Those out in radio and TV land, they want to get in on this conversation. Let's go to Tom in Youngstown, Ohio. Go ahead, Tom. You're on the air. Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, Bruce. Chief guest. You were talking about the whole situation with Trump saying that he takes Kim at his word when he said he didn't know what was going on. Let me throw a few things out here. And this goes to also the Prince situation, Saudi Arabia, to Russia and Putin and so forth. I don't believe that any dictator micromanages an entire country. They put other ruthless people into positions who they, let handle the situation to a certain extent accordingly. And I mean, do you really think that Hitler ran Nazi Germany by micromanaging everything, and the same with Stalin in Russia? And I mean, they had a general idea, or even Saddam Hussein with his sons.
But Tom, in the case of Otto Warmbier, hello, you there?
Yes.
In the case of Adam Warmbier, that was a story that was on the front page of newspapers all over the world. I mean, that was a big story. That was a cause célèbre. There's no way in the world that Kim Jong-un did not know that Otto Warmbier was in one of his prisons.
There's no way that you would not, there's not a handful of American citizens that were in that country. He had to absolutely know who the American citizen was that had just recently been arrested and sentenced to a prison camp.
Right. Back to you, Tom.
What I'm saying is, I don't believe that he knew. Look, let's look at it this way, too. A North Korean who's thrown in prison probably stood a better chance of survival because they were eating dirt. They knew exactly what to expect. You take a guy off the American street and throw him into that situation, especially a young kid, he has no idea what's going on, and his psychological makeup is such that he's probably not going to survive under the same circumstances. Mm-hmm. And all I'm saying is I think we have possibly two truths going on here. Number one, Warmbier's parents are right in saying that, Trump maybe shouldn't have backed this idea, but Trump is right in saying, look, I got to negotiate, and I got to take him at his word because he may not have known about it. And I'm not saying he didn't. I'm saying he may not have known about it. I can recall, for example...
But here's the point. The president consistently gives the benefit of the doubt to dictators. That's part of the MO. Now, you may like that or you may not like that, but that's the MO here. There's a pattern where he gives the benefit of the doubt to dictators. Other presidents, Republicans and Democrats, did not do that.
It's a change in position. I agree, but it's something that maybe would.
It's a change in the person as well.
Yeah,
there's no way that had Ronald Reagan been asked the same question, he would have found a far different answer than Donald Trump. He would have been able to soften it. He would have been able to be strong. He would have been able to give his Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall moment, because that was the uniqueness of Ronald Reagan. Now, I don't think it was just because he was an actor. There might have been a greater degree of empathy that Ronald Reagan had that Donald Trump does not have.
Yeah, can I point out another example?
Sure.
I was thinking of as I was on hold through the break there. I can recall in the Nixon administration when things were getting hot, and there was testimony afterwards that Haldeman had to call back G. Gordon Liddy because Liddy came out of a meeting with Nixon supposedly where Nixon said, this Anderson guy, Jack Anderson's really getting under my skin, so to speak, and we need to do so. We need to stop this guy. And the supposed conversation was that he went to Haldeman and said, Nixon wants me to kill Jack Anderson. And I guess what I'm saying is, I don't, if that can happen in the United States of America, I have no doubt that if you're putting a bunch of ruthless people in charge because you're a dictator and you have a lot of people under you who are of the same mentality, it's much more easily possible for them to do things along the same lines with your blessings, so to speak.
This, by the way,
what
you've just describes to me something I heard when Michael Cohen was testifying last week, and he said, you know, the boss didn't always give you a direction, but you sort of knew what the boss wanted you to do. And I would say that that exists in a lot of power situations. If you're part of the cadre that's around the king,
Right.
you know what the king wants. The king doesn't have to say. I would say the same thing for leadership of City Hall in the days of Richard J. Daley. Richard J. Daley didn't have to say, "Hey, do this." His people knew what the boss wanted to do,
So
and
it
I
could
think
also
that's
be
the
a true
case in a
statement.
lot of. I think that's the case with probably most leaders of the world.
That's right.
You know, you
So
don't
it
have.
could also be a true statement then that Kim's saying that, look, I didn't know that this was happening. I mean, look.
No,
he
I
said
don't
the
buy. I don't buy that.
environment
I don't
for it. You
buy
can't
that.
excuse
I
him
don't
for
buy
the
that for a
environment.
minute because also Otto Warmbeer's story was part of diplomatic discussions with them. So it was not just a media story. There were diplomatic discussions trying to get him out. That was going on for years or couple of years. And again, something of that nature would have made it to Kim. Anyway, we move on. Thanks very much for your call. Let's go to Caseyville, Illinois. Listening to us on Facebook. Go ahead, Paul. Are you there? Line 2. Paul. Going once, going twice, gone. Rick, are you there on line 3 in Nashville? Who is that?
That was Paul.
That was Paul. Huh, great impression. Let's go to Rick in Nashville, Tennessee. Go ahead. Line 3, are you there, Rick, on the internet? Well, all the lines have dropped off. Oh, well, so the lines are open. 1-800-723-8289 if you'd like to jump on and have the conversation.
See how easy it is for some people to justify this kind of behavior. This is one of the more remarkable things about all of this, how people, their ideological perspective determines their position on this stuff. I mean, it's just so incredible, you know. How
Yeah, that's why I don't think there's going to be many votes changed because of the testimony last week.
I agree.
It's going to reinforce positions.
Right.
One of the other pet topics of the national news media has been Mr. Kushner. And my question to you is, should he have a security clearance? Because it looks as though the President of the United States, you know, went out of his way to basically say to the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, that they wanted Mr. Kushner to have a clearance. Does that bother anybody?
Well, there's evidence this week, apparently, at least assertions, let me say assertions, that both the Chief of Staff at the time and the White House counsel at the time, Don McGahn, both wrote internal memos saying that the President had ordered a security clearance to be given to Jared Kushner over their objections and the objections of the intelligence officials in charge of approving security clearances. That's a serious problem.
Yeah, we'll have to get into the discussion of whether Kushner should have that security clearance or not. It is up to Trump to determine who has a security clearance. My thing is I frankly think that having your family in the administration next to you causes more problems than benefits. So that's my position on it.
But it may be that the family is might be the only people he can trust. Back shortly from Chicago. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Nice to have you with us. We're talking about Jared Kushner, and Jennifer, you wanted to make a point in defense of Mr. Kushner.
Well, Jared Kushner works on a lot of sensitive foreign policy matters. He does a lot of work in the Middle East. He's obviously a right-hand man of the president, and Trump has every right to give him a security clearance if that's what he wants to do. I don't know what the objections were or why the objections were made or if they were made, because we don't have this, like you said, Michael, they're allegations. I just think, and I've always thought, that having Jared and Ivanka next to Trump in the White House was going to reap more problems than we needed. Frankly, From my perspective, they're not conservatives. They never identified as conservatives, and that always makes me suspicious. And it made a lot of us suspicious. And we don't need, from my own perspective, we don't need to constantly have to worry about them all the time. But the president has chosen to have them there because he trusts them, and he feels that he needs to have them there.
That's the most important thing that I think a president needs. They have to have someone that they can trust. And in this particular case, you have Jared Kushner, who he trusts, or you have someone who has been basically cut down by the intelligence community, and they're likely to recommend someone else. And so then the question is, if you're the President of the United States, well, okay, when the intelligence community says they're sending somebody over, is that person loyal to me, or are they loyal to someone in the intelligence community who gave them
those kinds of distinctions are new. That's new territory for this country. I mean, it's so. I mean, it's
new territory for it to be discussed.
Right.
True.
It's always been there.
That's true. I mean, but I mean, again, it's an indication of his personality-oriented administration. You know.
And keep in mind, when you say a president needs people that he or she can trust, one of the things that he or she needs is people who he trusts enough that they can walk into the Oval Office and say, I disagree with you on this, and here's why. And you as the president have enough confidence that you're going to listen to what that person says. I don't know whether that exists.
And they need institutional memory.
I disagree. I think Jarrett and Ivanka both have the ability to go in, especially Ivanka, to go into the president and say, Dad, you're wrong.
Right, which is what has given us some pause from my side.
Because I agree, they are moderate to liberal.
They are, and on social issues, Ivanka is definitely
manifested it yet.
Oh yes, they have it in many ways, and
manifested in what way?
Well, Ivanka, for one, she has been very vocal in having government-funded childcare. And that is something, I'm all for child care, but the matter of government funding of it, not just for low-income people, but for all people, is something that we disagree with. And she has been very vocal.
Family leave, too.
Yes, and that is something, the devil's in the details on that. Okay, so that's a whole other discussion.
But would you acknowledge that issues like that, especially, those are issues that could bring some Republican women back to support the president in 2020.
I don't know how many.
The issues that may not be important to you,
I think that's the conventional wisdom, that when you give ground on those types of issues, that all these women are going to start running for you. I don't really think that's the case, because you still have the pro-choice issue. You still have other issues that women who have beliefs like that generally want to see that go along with it. And then in the process, you lose some of your base, which he can absolutely not afford to lose your base. So I think there's a tightrope back there. You do want to be more appealing to as many women as you can, but do you do it by spending more money and walking back your positions?
Jared is also the architect of the criminal justice reform.
Yes.
And that would not have happened without him blowing in the president's ear. Speaking about the president's ear, some people in this country would like a new president and a new ear, two sets of ears.
Okay.
And so that leads us into a discussion of the 2020 Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders literally is about 1 mile from where we're doing this program this evening. He's got a big rally over at Navy Pier, and so there'll probably be traffic jams getting out of here this evening. But my question to you is he the guy to beat? Is he the guy to beat Michael Bauer for the nomination?
You know what? Bernie Sanders worries me in the Democratic primary, because he walks in with a certain substantial constituency, you know, that's going to stick with them throughout. And if you have a field of what's looking like 14, 16, maybe even 20 announced Democratic candidates, having that significant base, that plurality perhaps, is going to get him through the primaries. Now, what I fear is, should he get the nomination, there is still a lot of heartache from some of the Hillary supporters toward Bernie Sanders over what happened in the general election and in the primary in 2016. And just as a number of Bernie supporters stayed home and didn't vote for Hillary, or even some of them, 10% of them, voted for Trump. My fear is if Bernie's the nominee of the Democratic Party, you're going to see a number of Hillary supporters stay home and not vote.
Well,
just to get back.
I think that what we saw with that war of words that happened between the Hillary camp and the Bernie camp that sprung up, where the expletives used about Hillary, that really signals something there. That animosity is alive and well, and that the Clintons still have power. Because what happened right after that? Bernie's top campaign people left. They split. The day after this happened. Now, why did that happen? We don't precisely know, but they went out in a blaze of glory. I think that Bernie Sanders' time, even though he had that big money bomb that just happened, it's not unprecedented. Ross Perot had one as well. He is old school now. We've got a bunch of progressives running, and they're younger, and they're more attractive. And
they're not all male.
And they're not all male. They've got other things. I don't think that this race, that Bernie Sanders, quite frankly, has a prayer, money aside, because 2 years is a long time. And boy, have we got a bunch of socialist candidates running.
I think Donald Trump would love for Bernie Sanders to be the Democratic nominee.
Well, his comments on Venezuela and Maduro are really hurting him with the Democrat community in Florida as well, and that's not something that you want to do. So,
what do you think, Salim? Is Bernie Sanders?
I think he's his views have been diffused throughout the candidate community.
So the originator doesn't get credit? The originator of
the
ideas doesn't
I don't think.
get
I mean,
credit.
he gets a little credit. He gets. I mean, he's revered by a lot of people, but he's not an attractive candidate. His age, his gender, and other things have more valence this year than they did in his last.
What about from your?
There's a meme online, at least in libertarian circles, that basically says. AOC is basically the Bernie Sanders that you want to have sex with. To backtrack on this for a second, just to give an example of what's what's going on in the Democrat circles.
That used to be a glass of beer. Now it's sex.
Not me.
What's going on? What's going on in the circles right now? What you're seeing is
not me either.
Is just to go back a few weeks ago. There was the Green New Deal. We don't have to talk about it. It's ridiculous to discuss the details of it. But when it came out right away, you had Cory Booker, you had Kamala Harris. Elizabeth Warren, they all immediately signed on to supporting it without knowing anything about it. And what that says to me is they want to get on that train. And Bernie is kind of the one that was leading that train originally, the one that started it and got it off the ground, where people weren't really afraid to talk about socialism in a public setting anymore and to be afraid of that word. So I think that's where it starts. A lot of those kids are trying to latch onto it in any way they can to help them, and it's not helping them so far. Elizabeth Warren is at 7%.
Governor Isley of Washington, he jumped into the race today. He wants to make climate change his big issue.
Hickenlooper is jumping in a few days.
And I think America needs Hickenlooper. What do you think?
Well,
for his name alone.
I have to tell you, I just want to say, I think the Democrats are going to have a lot of candidates, but there's a number of really strong candidates who are already jumping in. I think Kamala Harris. I think Amy Klobuchar. Michael Bloomberg apparently is going to announce. I think Sherrod Brown is a very strong candidate.
I thought he decided against it.
Apparently, he's looking for office space and talking to personnel.
Wow.
Running as a
Democrat.
Okay.
As a moderate Democrat.
Who's the strongest one? Who can win? The issue is, if you want someone to
win. Who can win the general, not the primary?
Can I tell you something? In 2016, when we started with the Republican primary, and we had 17 candidates,
1%.
Trump was at 1%. So this thrashing out process actually does a really good thing. It's a little bit of Game of Thrones and survival of the fittest, but the best, or the most effective rise to the top.
Watch what you were about to say.
I put my line back. But the most effective rise to the top. The cream rises to the top. So we'll see on the Democratic side.
But you know what's amazing about this? Well, there's a lot of amazing things about this. I am stunned, really, and it takes a lot to stun me. I'm cynical as all get out, but I am stunned at how in 2 years' time, because Hillary used to make a big deal of, I'm not a socialist. When she would go up against Bernie Sanders, she'd say this, I'm not a socialist. Now, what do? We have have a field, a very large field, where almost all of them have absolutely no problem being, in fact, they won't say whether they're socialists or not. They want to run
Amy
from the
Klobuchar
question.
has not
She
gone
doesn't,
that
and Tulsi Gabbard. So you have two people there, but this is out of a very large field.
And Michael
It's
Bloomberg
not-
and
Biden.
Sherrod Brown.
Michael, yeah, well,
Biden.
but if you ask them what their thoughts are on socialism, not Bloomberg, but if you ask Sherrod Brown, you ask them what they think, they're not exactly running screaming from the room. It's not just about the primary. It's amazing. I am
the wave of the
going to
future,
be,
Jennifer.
well, I'm going to be very, you say it's the wave of the future. You still have this large swath of Democrat voters, traditionally minded Democrats, we still have those, who are going to look at this, okay? Trump was able to peel some of them off, or otherwise he wouldn't have won. Who are going to look at this field
He's
and are
vaguely socialist
going
as
to
well.
be,
That's why
He's
he
what?
peeled. He was vaguely socialist himself. That's why he peeled some of them off.
he was vaguely socialist. We'll
Yes.
have to get into exactly what you think about the populist. Yes, socialism I would take issue with, but the field is amazingly far left without a lot of variety. So I'd be interested to see if that's going to change.
We will follow whatever. This is the earliest that a campaign has started. I think we're already into the 2020 campaign. I'm Bruce DuMont. We'll talk more about that and other important issues when we return.
You did. And then Rand Paul were the only two.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Michael Bauer is here, Salim Muwakil, Brian Lambrick, and Jennifer Nevins. They joined. That's the foursome this evening. And we mentioned this last week on the program, but again, there was a mayor's race, and a vote on this past Tuesday. And as Michael Bauer mentioned in the last hour, the 14-person field has been narrowed down to two people, the two finalists in the runoff on April 2nd. Both will be African American progressives. One is Tony Preckwinkle, who is the president of the Cook County Board, one of the largest political entities in the United States, and the other is Lori Lightfoot, who is an attorney and an outspoken spokesman, an openly lesbian running for mayor of Chicago. So my question, I'm going to open this up discussion because whoever the next mayor of Chicago generally is a big national story. And I would say that the 14-person field in Chicago, which had many candidates, is not unlike the large field that we're looking at the Democratic Party. And I think some of the battle for the hearts and minds of Democrats in the national Democratic Party is we're going to be witnessing that for the next month here in Chicago as the diverse Democratic constituencies of Chicago try to figure out who they want to anoint as the next mayor of the city. Now, we know that you are, Michael Bauer, you're the chairman of Lori Lightfoot's campaign,
Yes.
so I'm going to defer to Salim for just a second, because you've been an observer of the Chicago scene. You know it. I know you know Tony Preckwinkle well. I don't know whether you know Lori as well as the others, but what's your assessment? Because you recently wrote a Facebook post that the African American community, they should be celebrating what's going on, but maybe they're missing the significance of this election. And we should also mention that a third candidate in the race, Dr. Willie Wilson, he won all of the predominantly black wards except two.
Except two, right.
So what's going on out there?
Well, there's a lot of disillusionment out there. A lot of black people feel that their choice was rejected. Many didn't support Tony because of many reasons we talked about before.
And they're conservative African Americans, which you have talked about in many cases. The people that listen to your show. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a misunderstanding of politics in Chicago that all blacks are liberals.
Progressives or liberals.
Right.
In fact, in Chicago, there's some serious animosity toward progressives in the black community. They see progressives as usurping the power that they have achieved after a lot of struggle. And their candidate was Dr. Willie Wilson. And part of the reason for that was because he represented a rejection of the status quo in many ways, from his Ebonics accent to his to some of the policies he he wanted to institute.
By the way, we should also mention for those around the country, one of the other big pieces of news is that Bill Daley, who was the son of Richard J. Daley, the boss of this city for many years, and Richard M. Daley, the son of and brother of Bill Daley, he lost. He finished third. He finished out of the running. So the fact that
And many
Daley
people
lost
thought
in
that
Chicago,
he was a shoo-in. I think most of us around the table thought he was a
they
shoo-in.
certainly thought you were going to be in the runoff. That's for certain.
I just want to say this.
Michael Bauer.
I think what a lot of voters expressed from my perspective last Tuesday is they're unhappy with the way Chicago's running. And not just running recently. They're unhappy with the way that Chicago's been running for a long time. They're unhappy. We saw several aldermen, incumbent aldermen who have been in power for a long time, who not only lost, they lost huge by 2-1.
Yeah.
You know, we saw a number of incumbent aldermen who are now in runoffs and did pretty poorly. In
And
their
also
initial
there was
election.
an incumbent alderman who was indicted, and he won big, Ed
Yeah,
Burke.
Ed Burke,
Yeah,
right.
no, he didn't win big. 270 votes would have, had he had 270 votes less, he would have been in a runoff. It was 270 votes that saved him from a runoff. I'm actually surprised he did as poorly as he did. You know, he got about 54% of the vote, an award that he has dominated for decades.
So what happens? I want to sort of draw the comparison about what is likely to be happening in Chicago in the next month as people figure out who they're going to vote for. And how does that relate to what might be happening at the National Democratic Party in 2020?
Well, I think there's a huge parallel there because you have your two candidates in Chicago now. One of the two is going to be the choice, okay? But when you're looking at nationally, you have this field of Democrats here, most of whom are far left. There's a couple exceptions that are left. I would not call them moderates, but they're on the left. And you have this this group here. But the person doesn't have to be chosen from that field. They can cross over voters and vote for the Republican. And you were talking about the conservative African-American community in Chicago. We have that in this country as well. And when you have, and a host of other people who are more moderate or have religious beliefs that conflict with third-term abortion or the infanticide, different things that are going on now, they're sitting up and they're taking notice. And they're looking at this. And I would not rest on my laurels if I were Nancy Pelosi or other people in power and look at this situation and say, hey, regardless, the Democrats are going to come home. They're going to come home to one of our candidates because they're Democrat voters. That may not be the case because this field has gone so far left. I actually don't mind it in that I think it's going to help Trump get reelected.
But the situation in Chicago is you have the two candidates that are remaining are progressive.
Yes.
But 2/3 of the voters voted against them.
But one of them is going to make it in, though. I mean, I know that people did not all, you know, some people did not vote.
I think the parallel is that both of them will be striving for the black vote.
Yes.
Both of them will be trying to do whatever they can do to attract
Willie
black.
Wilson's vote.
the
But they're
black
not only going to
electorate.
go for the black vote. Keep in mind, they're going to go for the vote on the southwest side and the northwest side, a
Yes.
predominantly Caucasian vote
Right.
that Bill Daley, Jerry Joyce, and Gary McCarthy together pretty much got.
Right.
You know, so
But
they're
I
going
don't
to be
thi-
going for the Hispanic
They're-
vote.
they're going to- I
that
think they're
Susanna
gonna want-
Mendoza and Gary Chico got.
They're going to want those votes, but I don't think they're going to really because they don't really need those votes in a sense. If they can pull the majority of the black votes, Lori Lightfoot already has support on the north side.
The north side, right.
So I don't think they need to. You know, they only they have a specific target audience.
But
electorate.
you've got a
Yes,
situation
yes,
where
absolutely.
where by the way, Dr. Wilson ran fourth. He got about 56,000 votes. But the unique thing is he spent a lot of time talking with the preachers of the
Yes.
city. So he is definitely more conservative. What remains of the Republican Party in the
clergy
city,
based, in fact,
They
you know?
they supported the Republican Party, or at least elements of the Republican Party
Supported him.
supported Willie Wilson.
Yes, they did.
So you've got a unique situation, the dynamics of that. He's run before, and yet his big issue was taxes. I mean, he was absolutely the most anti-tax person.
Yes, he was.
Running.
That's why the Republicans
so
wanted him.
the decisions that those that followed him have to decide is what brought them to Dr. Wilson. Because if Willie Wilson endorsed Tony Preckwinkle, who is known for Madam Taxes.
Taxwinkle.
That doesn't
Queen Sugar.
That doesn't make sense to me. And again, the big issue, which I think is, to what extent are African American, not only the ministers, but again those that call themselves conservatives or religious voters,
LGBT.
to what extent can they support a candidate who is an open lesbian?
Yes.
I mean, that's going to be an issue.
That's going to be an issue.
Nobody
no
wants to
doubt.
talk about it publicly.
Well, they're
but
talking about it.
Oh,
People are
everyone
talking
is,
about
a lot of people are talking about it.
they're talking
and
about it.
there's actually been some national stories on this very issue.
And
But
I
this is
talked
gonna
with
be a
Lori.
test
I
for
talked with Lori
Chicago.
Lightfoot about it when I did the interview with her about 3 weeks ago, and she said, well, the number of LGBTQ plus persons in the black and brown communities is much larger than most people think.
It is.
So although the preachers may be saying something, the people in the congregations or in the choirs might be thinking differently.
I
Maybe.
think there's another constituency also that we're forgetting about. We're assuming that the voters who voted on February 26th are going to be the same voters who vote on April 2nd. And I would suggest to you that a number of people did not vote because there were so many candidates.
right.
It was
that
a
they were
bad
just,
turnout.
They were just
Really low turnout.
confused.
Absolutely
So we
right.
only had 33, 34% turnout.
Yes,
and
indeed.
with only 2 candidates in the race,
Right.
you will have
Absolutely.
a significant number of people who did not vote on April 2nd, who did not vote on February 26th, who will show up on April 2nd. So the 2 candidates will have to battle it out for those people.
And also, for regular listeners of the show, Amara Enya, who's been a regular on this show for about the last 3 years, she did run for mayor. She did not do well. She was endorsed by Chance the Rapper
And Kanye.
And Kanye West. Her whole campaign was focused on turning out the millennial vote. She was almost laser focused on bringing out the millennial vote. Only 11% of millennials in Chicago voted. So she put all of her eggs in a basket that did not come to fruition. And, I'm sure that some of the candidates would like to have her endorsement, but I'm not so sure it's going to move that many votes.
But also remember that her biggest backer, Chance the Rapper, his father is the campaign manager for Tony Preckwinkle.
That's right.
So it all becomes very complicated. And how this all works out, I have no idea. But there's a lot of, this is very Chicago. There's a lot of ties.
A lot of Machiavellian,
Machiavellian
maneuvers in this. Right?
yes.
That's right.
Yes.
And right now, it is, and it's also a situation where the large Mexican and Hispanic communities in Chicago, their turnout was relatively low as well, considerably lower than Susana Mendoza thought that it would be, and she was the leading Hispanic in the race, along with Gary Chico. Who
Although she was
did-
called a
did not-
Lino,
Yeah, she did not.
Latino in name only, right?
Right. Anyway, that's our discussion of what's happening in Chicago. When we come back, we'll go back to national talk conversation. And we thank you very much for joining us tonight from coast to coast and border to border. One more segment coming up. Don't go away. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. One of the topics we discussed briefly during the commercial break was the allegations that anti-Semitism is growing, and that some of the new members of the Democratic Congress are saying things that they've been slapped on the wrist for, that they are fomenting perhaps anti-Semitism, and yet there are some people that might suggest that these are issues that need to be discussed. The bottom line is that some have suggested that following the Benjamins, which means basically the allegation was that many members of Congress are basically influenced or bought by the Israeli lobby.
iPad.
A lot of money goes to them, and they consistently support Israel. And if you call that to anyone's attention, at least in today's climate, that's viewed as anti-Semitic. Do you view that as anti-Semitic, Michael?
Absolutely. The reason many members of the United States Congress and many elected officials support the state of Israel is first and foremost because we have shared values with the state of Israel. We believe in a democratic form of government. We believe in free speech. We believe in a free press. We believe in an independent judiciary. We have very common values. And Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, by the way, that exists, and is the only country with which we do have shared values. And the comments by Ilhan Omar are, frankly, from my perspective, so disgusting and so revolting. It is mind-boggling that a member of the United States Congress would be saying these things in 2019. But this, unfortunately, is a plague of anti-Semitism that is spreading like a contagious virus these days.
Salim, do you see it that way?
No, I don't. I think there is a problem with anti-Semitism, no doubt. But I think that we in this country, we have more of a problem with the kind of imbalance in the way we portray Palestinians. And this animus against the BDS movement, for example, Angela Davis was recently denied being awarded a human rights award in Birmingham because a Jewish organization said that she supported BDS. There was such an outroar, such an outrageous uproar because of that, that now they have rescinded that
Award?
No, they've now rescinded the refusal to give her the award, and they've awarded her, and she has been showered with accolades since then. And people were saying, "Wow, how could we possibly have been so influenced by this organization to deny her this award because of her support for BDS?" It seems very obvious that we have to support an organization that is against oppression, the oppression of people in their own homeland. It has been denounced by the UN several times. All of the international organizations have denounced Israel's denial of the Palestinians' human rights, and yet we in this country act as if it's all right. It doesn't matter if you take someone's land. And so there's an organization, a movement has developed to fight this view. And the BDS movement is what that is.
Let me suggest this. The BDS issue, whether you're pro-BDS or anti-BDS, is an issue of freedom of speech. And I know people who support the BDS movement. I know many people
Explain BDS for those that aren't.
Boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. That there should be a boycott, sanction, and divestment of in some figures, any company that does business on any Israeli company that does business on the West Bank. There are also some people who are pro-BDS who say you should boycott, sanction, and divest with any company that exists in Israel at all, and anywhere in Israel. So the BDS movement itself is a confusing term. But that, to me, is an issue of freedom of speech, whether you're pro-BDS or anti-BDS. When you start saying that support for Israel comes from showing the Benjamins, that's just an anti-Semitic comment.
The scholar at the University of Chicago, they did a deep study of the effect of the Jewish lobby, AIPAC, and they were very condemnatory of that lobby and how it has affected U.S. diplomacy and our foreign policy options. I just can't recall the names of the two very renowned scholars.
I know who you mean.
Yeah.
Well,
and so if they're not being denounced for that, it had scholarly rigor that everyone admired, and yet they're not being denounced, and yet you're denouncing other folks who say this primarily the same.
I would suggest to you the two University of Chicago professors have been soundly denounced as being anti-Semitic.
Oh, no, they haven't.
And that their research is tainted by their anti-Semitic perspectives.
And also, if this woman has such a problem,
and that's a problem. Calling every criticism of Israel anti-Semitic,
No,
that's the problem. That's what
No.
people are reacting to. This reflexive attempt to denounce and to deride people who are critical of Israel.
There's a significant difference in criticizing the policies of the government of Israel, which anyone is free to do, including myself.
Okay.
By the way, I will tell you, I'm highly critical of many of the policies of the Bibi Netanyahu administration, versus condemning Israel as an apartheid state. That is
Jimmy Carter wrote a book about it. Apartheid, that was the title of the book.
Yes,
This
I
is
know
Jimmy
that.
Carter, one of the most revered ex-presidents. That was his conclusion. It's apartheid.
He was revered as an ex-president,
If-
not so revered as a president.
If this woman was so concerned about the influence of foreign money affecting these Democrat and Republican reps, she would have gone after the Democrat and Republican reps for taking this money. But instead what she did is she made pot shots at Jewish organizations. Okay, that's who her target was. It wasn't against
AIPAC.
the people who were taking the money. It was against those organizations, and I think it was
And
an
AIPAC
extremely
doesn't
cheap
even
hit.
contribute a single dollar
Oh,
to
you know,
any
but
candidate.
you know.
AIPAC supporters, including myself, give money to candidates.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to tell you, evangelical Christians give money
Absolutely.
to candidates who are going to be pro-life, and that's the whole system of government
Right.
we have.
That's the way it
where people-
works.
people
In
write
fact, the
out
Jewish
checks.
lobby, is the Zionist lobby, as they would say, a lot of those are evangelical Christians.
She didn't need to single the Jews out, okay? She didn't. She did it because, frankly, she's anti-Semitic.
We
That's just
touched
the way it
the
is.
nerve at the end of the show. Sorry about that. We'll bring this conversation back as it won't end. Thanks to all of our guests, also to Sam Greenberg and Fritz Goldman for their assistance in the production of this program. I'm Bruce DuMont. Good night from Chicago.